Dietrich Bonhoeffer was born on February 4th, 1906, to Carl and Paula Bonhoeffer. His father, Carl, was a professor of neurology and psychiatry at the Berlin University. Dietrich also received his doctorate from the Berlin University in 1927. He lectured in the theological faculty there during the early 30s. He was ordained a Lutheran pastor in 1931. Obviously, Bonhoeffer was a witness to the rise of Adolf Hitler in Germany during the 1930s, and he became an outspoken critic of the Nazi regime. In 1934, several Lutheran pastors organized the Pastors' Emergency League in opposition to the state church controlled by the Nazis. This organization evolved into the Confessing Church, a free and independent Protestant church. Bonhoeffer served as head of the Confessing Church's seminary at Finkenwald. The activities of the Confessing Church were virtually outlawed, and its 5 seminaries were closed by the Nazis in 1937. Bonhoeffer's active opposition to National Socialism in the 30s continued to escalate until his recruitment into the resistance in 1940. Bonhoeffer's resistance efforts centered primarily around giving aid to persecuted people in Germany and also to rescuing Jews. Because of this, Bonhoeffer was arrested and imprisoned in April 1943. He was executed in 1945, just a few weeks before the surrender of Nazi Germany. Bonhoeffer wrote many influential books, letters, and documents, but the most famous, most important of his writings is The Cost of Discipleship, now retitled Discipleship. In that book, Bonhoeffer takes up the task of showing what Christianity really is at its foundation and how it affects the various ways we live out our Christian lives. If you want to put it in a nutshell, Bonhoeffer is showing that Christianity is all about discipleship. It's not merely the church discipling itself or one another. We're being discipled by Jesus Christ himself. Mere cultural Christianity, the Christianity that's easy, the Christianity that goes with the flow, it's no good, it's worthless. It needs to be discarded and done away with. The book is divided into 4 primary sections in 2 parts. The first section is Grace and Discipleship. The second section is also in the first part is the Sermon on the Mount. The third section, then the second part, is the Messengers. And the fourth section is the Church of Jesus Christ and the Life of Discipleship. This first section is certainly my favorite section. It's going to be most people's favorite section. It's entitled Grace and Discipleship. It deals with what it means to be a follower of Christ in the first place. Who is called? How are they called? What does that calling mean? Does it require anything of us to answer the call? What does it mean to accept it? That is a powerful concept. It's introduced by or brought to the table by Bonhoeffer here. It's very powerful, it's very practical, and it hits you right between the eyes. The second section is very rich. It's Bonhoeffer's take on each section of the Sermon on the Mount as recorded by in Matthew 5 through 7. He gives us practical insight. Really, in Bonhoeffer's view, the Sermon on the Mount defines much of the day-to-day walk of a Christian disciple's life. In part 3, the Messengers, that deals with the message of the gospel. It deals with the need that we have of bringing the evangelistic aspect of discipleship in our lives. Bonhoeffer tells us straight out that spreading the good news is costly. It might even cost our lives, but it's worth it. The reward of soul winning is worth the cost that it takes. The final part deals with various miscellaneous questions of church practice, baptism, church order, growing in the image of Christ. Again, a lot of practical information there, and that's the final part. The book is absolutely inspiring. It is convicting. Certainly that first section that talks about the cost of discipleship is something that, as modern Christians who really don't pay a real cost as far as persecution and the threat of maybe losing material things in our world today, at least we're not so far. It's a question that we really need to have some answers for. What does it cost us to be a disciple? Do we really pay a cost? What does it mean in our lives? What should it mean? Are we falling short of that? I think it's just something that in the church it's convicting, and we need to answer these questions for ourselves. I would encourage anybody, even if you don't read the whole book, get this book. Read that first section if you haven't done it before about what it costs to be a disciple. And I really believe that you'll get some conviction, and you'll come away with some things that the Lord will give you about that through Bonhoeffer's writing. Now, this book's not perfect. You can tell from this that I really enjoyed it. I really love it. It's not the first time I've read it. It does start with a bang, but it can get a little dry and drag a bit at times. There are some issues of theological relevance that not everybody are going to agree with. One particularly for me, I found, my copy was page 273. Bonhoeffer said the ultimate purpose of God is to establish a holy community, and that's fulfilled in the body of Christ. I certainly think that establishing a holy community in the body of Christ is a top priority of God. One of the very top priorities of God. Is it the ultimate purpose of God? I'm not sure I think that is right. I think probably I would say God's ultimate purpose is to bring glory to Himself, to make His name known. That's the purpose of creation. That's the purpose of relationship with Him. And so I would disagree there. Again, I don't think that's a big issue, but there's going to be things like that. Obviously, also being a Lutheran minister, his background is going to be very colored by Lutheran thought. Some of that last part, dealing with church practice, is going to have some things in there, that's going to be influenced by Lutheran. Again, you go into it knowing that, it shouldn't be a problem. And finally, we have to ask ourselves the question, what did Christians in the day that this book was written, well, how did they find it helpful? And how do Christians throughout time, since the book has been written, find it helpful? Well, obviously, the day that this was written, this idea of paying a cost of discipleship was very relevant. The people this was written to, the German people, who were trying to be Christians in a National Socialist environment that was absolutely anti-true Christianity, they knew what it meant to pay a cost. They had to pay a cost. If they were going to maintain living faithful Christian lives in that environment, there was a cost to pay. There are no two ways about it. The book really does a great job of explaining the interrelationship between grace, faith, works, and obedience. And it brings two concepts to the table that are very influential, not only to those in the day it was written, but also today, throughout time since it was written. It's the concept of cheap grace and the alternative concept of costly grace. These concepts are important for Christians to be mindful of in every generation. What does it cost for us to partake of the grace of God? And if we were to look at our lives, would we maybe discover that we have paid very little cost, possibly paid no cost? That's cheap grace, grace that costs nothing. We need to get back to the idea of costly grace. I think it's very relevant for the church today. Finally, I say to see one as Bonhoeffer, so willing to give so much for what he believed. And ultimately, that's the example of Jesus Christ, to give up everything for us. To see that example expressed in the book by Jesus, and then the life of Bonhoeffer, it's very inspiring. And it's something that we should very much do well to heed the words of this book.